Traveling and travel writing can make us feel very vulnerable. When we're out in the world, we don't feel as though we control our environment. And when we're describing the experience of travel, we feel often as though we're revealing something about ourselves that perhaps we don't want to reveal. So one of the skills that we need to learn as travelers and as writers is to cultivate an openness in ourselves. One of the keys to cultivating openness is mindfulness, which is a term that we hear very often in popular psychology these days. It actually describes a discrete set of skills. The first of these is being intentional. In other words, being clear about what it is that we're doing and what we intend in doing that. I'm taking a walk in the woods. I am observing the flight of birds or the patterns in the leaves, that sort of a thing. In other words, that we're able to describe to ourselves what we want, what we're trying to achieve. The second is to be dialectical, which is to say, to acknowledge that sometimes there is conflict in the reality that we are experiencing, that we can be, for example, both happy and angry at the same time, that we can love and hate someone at the same time, or that we can experience something that we find really dynamic and exciting, but also be fearful of it. And a dialectical mind is able to hold those competing impulses in place at the same time and not to allow one to overwhelm the other. Which leads us to the third skill, which is to say, wise mind. In other words, not allowing ourselves to be driven by our emotions, but allowing ourselves to be driven by what some would refer to, I suppose, as our reason, or at least our understanding of what is good, what is necessary in that moment, and what is healthy. If we can cultivate this mindfulness, this willingness to sort of sit in the paradox of things, to understand what it is that we expect to achieve in any given moment or in a particular experience, we will achieve that wise mind. And that's one of the first keys to openness. That is what we mean by mindfulness. Related to this is the ability to be very clear and concrete about what we are observing and how it makes us feel. Now, this requires a certain amount of precision. When we describe something, particularly in writing, where we really have an opportunity to kind of refine our language, we want to be as concrete as we possibly can. What is this that I am seeing? What is this object in front of me? What is this energy in the room? That sort of thing. And relate it to how we're feeling. And the ability to describe a specific emotion is a very powerful thing. It has two particular results. Number one, it clarifies for us what we're feeling. Sometimes we imagine one emotion, and when we look a little deeper, we realize that it's something else, that maybe what we're experiencing is anger, which we often refer to as a secondary emotion. It's something that's brought up by another one. Underneath that feeling is something like shame or humiliation. And if we're able to name that, not only does it give us precision around our feelings, it also allows us to sort of release the energy of it. In other words, it allows us to live within the dialectical that I was talking about earlier, the kind of balance of, or imbalance, I should say, of the reality as we experience it. Competing feelings, they begin to dissipate and resolve themselves. So the language around these things should be precise. They should also be personal, that we should understand that what we're observing through our own eyes. What we're feeling through our own senses and our own sensibility. The more we're able to do this, to be precise and personal in the way that we name things, the more we practice it, the more it becomes an automatic skill rather than a defense mechanism to help protect ourselves when we're feeling vulnerable. It becomes a system for organizing how we're experiencing it, which allows us to be more open to that experience. The third element of cultivating openness is to avoid expectation. In other words, to not come into an experience thinking, this is what I expect or what I intend to make happen, but simply committing to entering that experience, to being part of whatever is happening, or to being part of the process of observing, describing, and writing about what has happened to us. Now, that commitment actually offers us an opportunity. When we go into something with expectation, we are looking for a particular thing, right? So we tend to be drawn directly toward it. When we're committing ourselves to being, say, in the moment, or being in whatever environment that we're in while we're traveling, or while we're thinking about how we're going to describe where we've been, there's a greater tendency for our mind to wander in its own direction rather than being directed towards some conclusion or something inevitable. As we wander, we're much more likely to encounter things that we wouldn't otherwise have observed. In other words, to be surprised, right? Or to be taken down a different path. And finally, and because of those two things, we find ourselves in an act of exploration rather than sort of chasing after, something in expectation, which would serve somewhere along the lines of a scavenger hunt, right? Exploration is simply moving in the direction that things take us. If we're committed to that idea of being a wanderer, of being one who's willing to encounter, of being willing to explore rather than simply move in the direction of some intention, it opens us up to an enormous number of experiences that we could not possibly have calculated for.